Hello, everybody. I'm Renata Ávila. I'm one of the fellows, Rhizomatica fellows at Stanford. And I'm your host today of this conversation that I'm really looking forward. It is about something that we don't hear often in tech circles that are mostly Anglophone, US or EU centric, and sometimes with some views on China, some views on Russia. And we forget what's going on in Latin America. Latin America was the most exciting region in the world at the beginning of this century. It was the epicenter of the most vibrant free software communities. It was where a seed of free culture and remix culture was planted. It was also one of the pioneers in the open education movement. And it was really a place of multitude of places and cultures embracing the possibilities of digital. And then different things happened: politics, the architecture of technology, and barriers that increased multiple inequalities, that failures in public policy, austerity hitting the countries, and many factors that made that shattered those dreams of a place where a new technology was possible. But quietly, maybe not as visible in mainstream media and in Anglo-speaking media, many communities, thinkers, hackers, and doers are doing amazing work at the community level, at the national level, at the regional level. And today, depending on the time that you are watching this from, we are going to showcase those experiences involving infrastructures, experiences involving massive mobilizations of women, experiences involving the syncretism of indigenous cultures with the digital vision of this century. So it will be very fast because we have four speakers joining us today. And we will start with something that is someone is very special because it comes from the same country I come from. And it also comes from a different generation from my generation. So I think that it is just an honor and a pleasure to invite someone who is, I cannot use one word to describe her because she's so many things in one. She's a lawyer, a technologist, a hacker, an artist, an organizer, an environmental activist, and an indigenous leader, a wonderful woman, Andrea Ixchiu. And who also, on top of everything, lives in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Welcome, Andrea, and you are going to explain in this panel about digital emancipation in Latin America. The perspectives I guess that you can cover beyond just Guatemala and the Mayan epicenter of change. The floor is yours, and I'm really happy and grateful that you're sharing with us tonight.
Thank you, Renata. I'm really delighted to be part of this panel and also to being capable of listen and learn from amazing experience that I have been following for a long time, and to some of the people that are sharing with me in this panel. But to talk on what emancipation can look like in a country like Guatemala, from the highlands in Totonicapan, where I live, it's talk also about the necessity of understanding internet, future, and narrative as a territory to dispute. And why I'm saying this is because I work to expose, disrupt, and shift cultural assumptions, and to create spaces for other narratives that possibilize hope and justice. So we work with some methods that we call the culture hack process, that is basically created to being able to talk about to bring other stories into the internet. So what I'm going to share with you a bit is something that we're working on, and it is a narrative laboratory. We call it El Futuro es Indígena, or Indigenous, the future is indigenous. So we're trying to hack the narrative on the climate crisis. because we have seen that in the midst of this huge conversation, that it's important, that it's urgent, the voices of the indigenous communities sometimes are not part of these conversations, or are just small parts of these conversations and non-relevant in this global conversation. So for us, understanding the cultural health process, it's also talk about the necessity of a process of cultural change. So when we say that, that the change is possible, we think that changing the ways in communication, changing the codes in communication can also be possible to bring change in narrative. And that can also possibilize the change on our thoughts, and that possibilities the cultural change. So we are seeing that facing these narratives that are imposed about the climate change, it's also something that that brings how to change meme by meme these structural systems of oppression, colonialism, patriarchy, extractivism, racism, and all this culture, this neoliberal capitalist culture that has been delivering narratives that have been telling us for long periods of time that the growth is good, that the economy has no limits. And these narratives have also been delivered through speeches, especially economist speeches that says that we can only bring the wellness to the world through the economical growth. And these narratives and speeches has been delivered through a lot of histories and messages, documentaries, books, universities, schools, memes, videos, songs that says that the green growth is the only alternative to the climate crisis. So we saw how these histories, messages, discourses, narratives are being fed by these cultural capitalist neoliberal systems of oppression that has been also spread in the world. So these are systems also that are imposing death in our indigenous communities, that are facing extractivism, that we are facing daily in our daily basis, the necessity of defend our land and our water from huge corporate interests that are trying to dispossess us from the most valuable and precious things, that it's the earth and it's the land. So when we talk about culture hacking, it's to make from the radical a common sense. And hacking the narratives on the climate crisis means that we need to assume and understand that the climate crisis is a problem that is putting our life in danger as planet Earth. So we use this method to basically understanding, creating narrative horizons with community leaders, with people that is working on the ground defending the land, with people that is working from academia. We're putting together people that from different areas so we can create narratives. So we create our narrative horizon. We map who are participating in this conversation. We are using open source code programs to listen what is going on in these conversations, to listen to media, to listen to the social networks, to understand the speeches, the dominant narratives, who are speaking about the climate crisis, what they're saying, how the indigenous communities are naming this whole conversation and discussion. And then we use all this information, this knowledge we gain from listening these conversations, from mapping our networks to recode this and create control hegemonical messages, to decode the language of the people in power, to create a logic and understand the logic behind the narratives of the mainstream media. What's the narratives behind the mainstream speeches of the people in power? And also to recode a message, to create the narrative interventions so we can disseminate radical messages that say that growth is not more important in life, that indigenous voices are important because we are the 5% of the people's of the world's population that are preserving the 80% of the biodiversity in the world of the world. So we use this step by step. We create this narrative horizon. We understand. We speak to each other. We create a narrative community in between indigenous communities, in between leaders, in between communicators, geeks, hackers, so we can together see how the oppressions are connected and the resistance are also, and how this problem is so big that it's really important to think in the local action, in the global connection, in this climate narrative conversation. So part of also of in understanding these narratives also bring us to the recode and the hacking process. And as I'm showing you in this slide, in between this step of changing communication and changing the narratives is the area of the cultural hacking on the digital platforms that we're using to process it. So creating messages from our narratives to open holes on these systems is possible. Decoding these messages and creating control hegemonical narratives, it's part of the things that we do all the time as human rights defenders, as lawyers, as defending the land and the people that as us work daily in a daily basis to create ways to connect also the communities that are resisting and struggling to defend life and water, and to put our messages there in opening the conversation. So we know that we want to create cultures that are diverse, not monocultives, that we are not monohistories. We want diversity. And that diversity is the ones that we want to be in creating narratives that are telling from indigenous perspectives that everything is connected, everything has life and a purpose. And these discourses have teach us from many, many years that the respect of nature is important because we're part of it. And we're trying to deliver these narratives and speeches that talks about life and putting life in the center of our conversations in memes, in books, in platforms, in digital actions, in communication that can remember the people that we don't want to go back to normal. We want to go back to earth, go back to life, go back to nature. So creating memes that can share this and hack this narrative of the climate crisis that are telling the people that there's no hope, that there's no future, is part of also of the work that we want to create. And also to let people know that the alternatives to the climate crisis are already living and vibrating in the indigenous communities that are being exterminated by this capitalist way of living that is consuming the land, the earth, and everything on it without limits. So it's really important to think about the necessity of changing the narratives and using open source technology to understand it, because it's really important to remember that in the climate crisis, we cannot save us, we cannot solve these problems. They're trying to make us as a medicine the same problems that causes the diseases. So capitalism will not save us and will not change anything on earth to fight the climate crisis. So it is really important to name the extermination process that we're living, the ecocide, the genocide. It's important to hack the narrative with a lot of diverse stories that already exist in our communities. It's really important to remember how necessary it is to diversify narratives and also to reforest our hearts and spirits. So that's part of what I wanted to share with you, that the use of the culture hacking method that we create and use to bring indigenous leaders from different communities with people, hackers, creators, people that making films, so we can hack on the narratives and power and doing it in a creative and joyful way.
Thank you, Andrea. And we will go back to you at the next round, but now I want to give the floor to an anti-racist hacker. First, we had a cultural hacker connecting a very important dot of digital emancipation and climate change and our role on it. And now you say something very important, Andrea, on narratives. And our next speaker, Nina da Hora from Brazil, is precisely not only an anti-racist hacker, but is one of the few technologists that are like from the new generation, really hacking the discourse, hacking with the words and the narratives, and the channels of these, predominant tech giants, hacking them from the inside, and taking back the words and the narratives to basically guide a new generation of anti-racist activists in thinkers and coders in Brazil. Nina, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Renata. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this panel. I'd like to thank Chu for Renata for inviting me. I'm from Brazil, Duque de Caxias specifically. I'm close to graduating from Computer Science in PUC-Rio, and my project is about the dangers of facial recognition for Black people. So we focus on Brazil and how we can fix it. I consider myself to be a hacker anti-racist, so I have a podcast called OVE that presents Black scientists from the Africa continent and the diaspora. And I'm also part of the Brazil TikTok Security Council. So now I will share with you some things about Brazil and facial recognition and technology. Okay. So the first thing I will share you why do I defend banding scam. My research with this focus has been divided in two phases. Number one, investigates and recovers technology history in Brazil. And the second phase is in the second focus on the tech algorithm models. So I am creating a platform to test civil society knowledge and tries to make sense of what is happening in Brazil. Because of this, in the last month, I got involved in some with a little action on Twitter. NGO from Brazil used the facial recognition to deliver food donation to residents of favelas, and I questioned them on Twitter. I had this question, and other researchers and activists from Brazil made this problem come to light and were able to improve this chaotic situation. In 3 hours, the NGO stopped using the tool. This was a different example of the use of tech surveillance here in Brazil. After this, I've been monitoring political forces on Brazilian social networks. Here in Brazil, we have been using Twitter very intensely to report and create digital mobilization on certain subjects and to call out that a lot of hashtags and content are being hidden on the platform or do not have the expected range. So we are in the middle of the polarization of content and news, and this has directly impacted on our elections in 2022. Okay, this is so hard to me to say, but Brazilian computer research is today focused on developing solutions with companies that are aiming to use AI to make society every day easier and lighter, but without evaluation the different contexts that are lived in this country. We are constantly being we are constantly being impacted by the speed that Brazil is too late to join the debate. So the thought is to accelerate the technological solution. So this is the main solutions technologies today here in Brazil and the focus. Instead of I think this happens in other Latin American countries as well. Okay, this type of colonization technology I think the vulnerability on the internet is constant and is also one of the pillars of internet creation. It is about architecture decentralization. It was initially formalized and not designed to have a leader or even owner. But in fact, the security of certain countries living through war has been prioritized. So, with protocols based on principle and how connections should be made, a point that. So, obviously, the creators didn't consider when think about inclusion or individuals also have control and the power of search technology. Nowadays, I believe that some big tech use a models of designed colonization to never let countries in the Africa continent and the Latin America to never own accessible and practical technology. So this one other example here in Brazil, now relationship with colonizing technology. 56% of Brazilians adopt technology in pandemic life. Uh, why is this technology? Most of them using Twitter, using Facebook, using TikTok, using Instagram, social network, and other technology that involved face recognition and speech to text or text to speech. So as I grew up, I realized how our culture, education, and science suffered great impacts from other continents. And when we come together and think collectively, not about to dominate each other, but mainly respecting our freedom. Okay, here in Latin America, I know that today we are experiencing a massive calls, a totally calls in Latin America, but um, I believe in the union of the different Latin generations who are looking to study and strengthen their cultures and countries to be, I think it should be in places where real change can happen, like in the governmental process of decision making that would help us to fight the dictatorship and the colonization that are still so present in our lives. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Nina. And we need to use our own technological tools. And that's perfect connector for our next speaker, because it's someone who has dedicated his life basically to building together with communities their own technological tools and shaping their technological future. So Peter Bloom, who has been in list like the top 100 global thinkers or the innovators under 35 a while ago, will join us to tell us what Rhizomatica is doing and all his projects and how he's fighting back the digital colonialism that is imposed in the global south and more concretely in Latin America. Welcome, Peter, and it is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Renata. Thanks for that great segue, Nina. That's perfect. Almost like we planned it. So I wanted to share an image quickly. I don't know if I can do this easily. Can you all see that? So we had Andrea who was saying the future is Indigenous, right? So here we have an image from the organization that I work with and helped to start, saying the future is communitarian, is community-based. So good to see that synergy as well. Yeah, so as Renata said, I guess I would more kind of want to just share my experience here in Latin America, working on some of these topics for the last 10 years, approximately, maybe a little bit more, trying to build our own technological tools, doing that together with communities, and trying to keep it all working and functioning every day in and out in some pretty challenging environments, for many different reasons, politically challenging, weather-wise, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I've been collaborating with indigenous communities in Latin America for the past decade or so, trying to figure out just exactly how we can do this. How can communities rethink technology in ways that are important to them? So not rethinking technology for the sake of doing it, but for the sake of actually solving some different problems or some different challenges that they might be having. So this work has taken me to a lot of different places, different communities around the continent. And I think sort of the very interesting part about the work that I've been privileged to do is around just this idea of the community, where a group of people can come together and they can solve problems. And they can solve problems using tools that maybe they weren't used to or accustomed to using previously, but through different methods can start doing that. So very concretely, I've worked in different places with different types of technologies. The big one that's kind of been central in my work is around mobile technology, the mobile phone, the fact that a lot of people on the planet now walk around with a computer in their pocket. And the specific types of people who are walking around with that computer in their pocket, many of them actually live in places that aren't connected to the internet. So our work has been very much about, well, how do you make a cell phone, this computer that people are walking around with, useful for people in a community context, in a land defense context, in a cultural strengthening context. So I guess the biggest project that we've done, the most important project, is working with communities here in Oaxaca, where I'm speaking to you from, in southern Mexico. Working with communities in the mountains, Zapotec communities, Mije or Ayuk communities, Mixteco communities, to build a decentralized and a federated cellular network. And really, with the communities, think about, well, what would it look like if we owned and operated our own infrastructure? How would we do that? And very interesting kind of design questions or organizing questions come out of that. Like, what does it mean? So how is the government going to respond? Is this going to bring more repression onto us? Is it actually going to emancipate us? And how do we make it sustainable financially so that we're not just pouring money into this? And we're talking about communities that, are made up many times of subsistence farmers, folks who migrate to the US. So yeah, we've basically been working together with these communities for the past 8 or 9 years, trying to figure out what would it look like and what are the actual technological tools that need to underpin an indigenous owned and operated cell phone network that is collectively owned and collectively operated across many different communities. And out of that came all kinds of other interesting conversations as well, which I think is an important aspect of this work as well, which is around regulation and policy, kind of how the rules that exist. So we deal with technology sometimes kind of not in the abstract, we deal with it very concretely, but we kind of decontextualize it from the policy and regulatory spaces that it exists within. And a lot of our time and effort has been spent trying to say, okay, we have now the technological tools. There's now an experience of communities doing this, but what does it look like to question the regulatory framework that allows only large companies to provide internet and cellular services to people and doesn't allow communities to do it, or gets in the way of it, or creates artificial barriers? So we've been working a lot on the issue of spectrum and access to spectrum frequencies, the airwaves, and how indigenous people specifically can access the airwaves in ways that are more appropriate for what it is that they want to do. And that's building a cell phone network, great. If that's launching their own satellite, that's also great. Whatever the communities decide is important. So yeah, I mean, I think the question there becomes, what is our capacity as communities facing multiple different oppressions to actually run infrastructure? It takes a lot of effort. It takes money, it takes time, it takes expertise. it's, you know, one more responsibility, one more thing for a community to be in charge of. But what we've seen over the years working on it is that it's also something where it provides, it's an opportunity as well for the communities to reflect more deeply on technology, and instead of being kind of passive users or passive, it's just having technology done to them. The communities are instead able to define their own technological future. And in our estimation, the only way to combat much of what, you know, Nina was talking about, for example, is to have our own technological tools and know how they work, understand how they work, and be able to use them in ways that are different from what's given to us. Like in Latin America, just as in other places in the global South, you know, technology is something that kind of arrives and, you know, becomes popular, and people kind of adapt to it and adapt it and hack it and do all kinds of stuff to it. But the sort of general, you know, extractive nature of it stays the same, and the kind of lack of understanding of how it works stays the same. And many times the lack of any ability to do anything different remains. So how do we flip that on its head and do something different? And so for us, the base of that is our communities organizing themselves, defining what it is they want to do with technology, and also defining what it is they don't want to do with technology, what it is they want to do that doesn't involve technology. And also not assume that with these technological tools we can fix everything or solve all the different issues that people want to work on. But there is a subset of things that are there and that are certainly addressable by rethinking, remixing, hacking technology. So yeah, it's been a really interesting adventure, one that I never really imagined myself being on. I'm having more of a community organizing background, and it's been very interesting also working with programmers, hackers, other people, bringing them into discussion and conversation with Indigenous communities around different ways forward. So I guess I'll leave my comments at that. I know we have more chance later. Thank you.
Yes, 1,000 questions, 1,000 questions, because earlier in the conference we were talking with cities, and the participatory approaches of cities that, they stay commenting on the technology, and they stop at commenting on the technology, and they do not go deeper into actually giving the tools, or even opening the space of making the technologies by the people, which is what's fascinating about what you're doing. And our next speaker, believe it or not, is a lawyer, a recovering lawyer. I will describe it as such, and a researcher at Just Labs. He's also one of the initial members and founders of Tierra Común. Tierra Común is an effort. We will share later the space for you to check and join, and he can tell us more about it. And he has been in the most prestigious research centers exploring this intersection of technology and society, from the Berman Klein Center to Oxford and many other places. And he's currently writing his PhD and also collaborating in shaping a new vision, a third way of tech. The floor is yours, Juan Ortiz Froiler from Argentina.
Thank you so much, Renata. Such an honor and a pleasure to be with such a distinguished panel. It's been fascinating to hear so much. And a perfect segue to some of the things I wanted to discuss today. So I think the big question you were asking us is, why do we need emancipation? And I think listening to all of the speakers, it's very clear that there are many worlds that need to inhabit this world, right? And as Nina and Peter and Andrea were saying, technology is a social cultural artifact, right? It bears the marks of its social production, the values and the language of the culture where it was created. And through these, it shapes our perspectives on life and the world we are building and our visions of possible futures. So, as Peter was saying, you can always kind of hack the technology, but it can also bring certain limitations in what you can do with it, right? And Renata, you and I met in an organization called the Web Foundation, which was built by Tim Berners-Lee, with this idea of a web being a distributed system, which to some extent afforded some of these possibilities of having, a more federated network, as Peter was mentioning, on the infrastructure side, but on the content side, right? And to allow the diversity of narratives that Andrea was talking about, and not this centralized system that we kind of have now, which is promoting, in Andrea's terms, a monoculture and a mono-narrative, or is favoring those at the least. So whereas we had a system that kind of promised to be a more decentralized system, a more federated system, where many of these worlds could kind of share their existence, increasingly we're seeing that big tech has taken over these centers of power and kind of gobbled up the alternatives. And so now we see that big tech has an exclusive access to the tower from which the full tapestry of cobwebs created by our connections becomes fully visible. And big tech now has a privileged access to the knowledge that emerges from our collective work on the web, and a privileged position from which to define what knowledge is produced, prioritized, and consumed. And this is not just on the content layer, right? What I think is increasingly a challenge for us in Latin America is that we're seeing that from the infrastructure, from the kind of undersea cables that connect the different continents and connect the different countries, these mega highways of information, they're being increasingly controlled by those who already control the content layer, right? We're seeing that Amazon, Facebook, and Google are increasingly responsible for managing these cables. And this kind of vertical integration is going to create a massive problem for any of us who are trying to kind of combat this monoculture that is being proposed by these kind of centralized systems of algorithmically curated content. And this also, of course, brings a lot of national security problems, right? Do we have networks of a brotherhood, or are we creating networks of surveillance? And less than a decade ago, we saw how all these centralized networks were being infiltrated by intelligence agencies, in particular by the NSA, and how that was a problem for our economic development. This was not just, quote unquote, combating terrorism, whatever that means, but they were going into companies, they were going into activists. And so that, of course, creates a lot of questions about how we're going to develop. And Nina was mentioning how the pandemic created a massive amount of people to join the internet and to start engaging online. And we're seeing that it's not just that, and Francesca Ávila was mentioning this earlier today, it's not just that the internet economy has grown, it's that some of these companies are taking over space that was previously distributed across smaller actors, right? And so we see that today, or these figures are from, I think, a year ago, 5 out of 10 of the richest people in the world are people in the tech sector, are people from the US and in the tech sector. So these sectors are not only growing in their own right, but they are gobbling up other sectors. And we're seeing that these centralized systems are also creating risks for our autonomy and for sovereignty, right? And so we can see there's a gathering storm where Russia is now testing, an internal internet to kind of be prepared in case, whatever happens. We see that the Chinese tell the state offices to replace all foreign PCs and software. We see that the US is cutting off Venezuelans from using Adobe and everything that's on the cloud of Adobe. And the Iranians, Syrians, and people in the Crimea are getting locked out of their GitHub accounts. And in South America, we have become very much dependent from the United States and China. It's you see it from how our economic systems are geared, right? They are our biggest allies in terms of exports. That's where we get our dollars in order to buy much of the technology that we rely on. And so it creates a lot of questions as to how are we gonna develop our technologies in a way that is not kind of controlled by these governments. We saw that in last year, Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, the former U.S. Secretary of State, was pushing for something called the Clean Network, which was basically excluding China from the whole stack, so to speak. And it was requiring all free-loving nations and companies to join the Clean Network, and basically pressuring countries not to make deals with China, basically creating more of a monopoly for US companies. And there are reasons to believe that the Biden administration is going to continue with some of these policies, probably not with the same fireworks that the Trump administration was used to, but we're already seeing some signs of that through what is called the Chips for America, where they're saying, if you engage with these funds that the US is going to provide, you cannot engage with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and we can assume that list might grow over time. And so how are we going to win? And that's something that we're going to discuss in the next segment. But I think it's very clear that we have a big problem to solve.
I will say that let's start, let's do the opposite round and instead, how do we win? Tell us how do we win, and then we will ask in reverse order. You first, then Peter, then Nina, and we close with Andrea, and then open for questions from the audience. We have very little time, so we will need all of you to be as snappy and quick as possible, and so to also give a chance to respond questions from the audience. And last thing, I forgot to mention that you can write questions in the chat if you're watching this, and we will try to ask them in the little time that we have left.
Okay, so I think it's about creating a radical shift, right? So I think all of the panelists here, and it was nice to hear that we have so many synergies, right? I think we need an information system that is geared towards solving the big challenges that we face as humans on this planet. And I think that has kind of two big components. One is how to mitigate, adapt, and distribute the impacts of climate change. And the second one is how do we help individuals and communities flourish by creating a state of abundance that guarantees people's basic needs are met. And so on the one hand, we free mental space so they can explore and understand who they are. And on the other hand, by providing them with tools to engage meaningfully with others in this journey, right? Because we are not going to understand who we are without our community. So it's not about me, but we, kind of making that shift and creating technology that allows us to carry out that shift. But again, we have this challenge of, how are we going to face those two big actors? And I think we are at a point that is similar, especially in Latin America, similar to what happened after the Second World War, where, the US was telling Europe, you have to release the colonies that they were controlling in Africa and Asia, kind of opening the market to the US. And at that point, there was, the non-aligned movement, where leaders from these kind of emerging nations said, wait, we don't want to be, either part of the US empire or part of the Soviet empire. We want to decide for ourselves. And I think that's something that we need to build into that. And so with Ulises Mejias, we're working on this non-aligned technological movement, showcasing alternative models, creating partnerships and alliances, and trying to find legal frameworks and regulation that enable these systems to thrive. But I think if we have to admit, Renata was saying, they're like, be the trouble you want to see in the world. And do you know where your personal data is stored? The personal data that the government holds about you, where is it stored? There is a warehouse somewhere in the world, or several warehouses, where that is stored. And what happens if, say, the US decides your government is rogue and they're going to take that data and use it for something else? Can you promote a shift towards free and open software so that there is more space to wiggle, because that technology is not tied to these mega corporations that respond to one of these two big countries? And I think most urgent at all, the whole of Latin America is in the middle of a health crisis, but that is most likely going to lead to an economic and social crisis, and that's where the vultures are gonna start circling around and start forcing some of these bad deals, where they're gonna say, well, you're gonna join this vertical system of US stack technology or this Chinese stack technology. And I think that is something that we definitely need to combat.
Thank you, Juan. Now, Peter. Peter, you are like a very welcome as well to combine your response on how do we move from here. And with one of the questions, I will take the opportunity, because we have such short time and I don't want to leave it out, that the audience made on how the indigenous communities designed that wireless network, and they want to understand better how that was done, and what came out of that unique experience. Is it scalable? Yeah. So
yeah, great.
Juan.
Yeah, no, I think Juan, you did a fantastic job of putting forward some very concrete proposals, so I won't say anything more on that. And to answer the question to someone who's watching, well, really, honestly, it was a multi-year design process, I guess, of a lot of iteration, but really it started from community assemblies. So in communities, getting everyone who wanted to be involved together. At first, we would have design assemblies, decision-making assemblies, 400, 500 people, sometimes men, women, everybody in the community, really. And we would just work through some of the different options, because when we set the network up at the first point, it was like, look, there has to be some place, there's going to be a signal, and everything else besides that is open for discussion. And there were a lot of really interesting things that came up. For example, what's the difference between charging for use of the network and looking at it as a vehicle to make money versus how would we just keep this thing going? How do we sustain what we're doing? And how does that change how you think about how you're charging or charging at all for a service that the community is basically providing to itself? So yeah, a lot of really big meetings, a lot of conversations, working through scenarios with people. Sometimes these meetings, would go on for 3-4 hours. Taking those ideas, putting them into code, basically creating the software to do what people had asked to do, putting that into the network, seeing what happened, having another meeting, and going on and on for that. And I mean, we've been doing that for the last many years. So the question of scale, I think, is an important one. I think, and also, what do we mean by scale? And also, where does the idea of scale enter into the lexicon of people who don't necessarily live in that way? So I think, like, a lot of the issues that we talk about, I think we sometimes confuse the issue of scale with the issue of the ability for things to flourish, like Juan was saying. In other words, we cannot expect that there's going to be the alternative Facebook that's going to have billions of users. It's going to be a lot of different things. And it's going to be a lot of different things that are going to come out of the uniqueness and the difference and the variety that thankfully exists still in the world, and that Facebook and others are trying to destroy, to get rid of, to basically flatten. So there isn't necessarily a thing that's going to scale. I think in our case, in these communities, they were able to put these networks up and do this. And we've tried to do it in other places. They've invited us, and it doesn't always work. Some places it does, some places it doesn't. And that has to do with how folks organize, what folks are really trying to do, and really going through these processes. So it's slow, like we're not going to win tomorrow. And winning, I think, is going to look very different than what hegemonic neoliberal capitalism talks about as winning in scale and sort of taking over and becoming the hegemon. I don't think that's what we're aiming at, and I don't think that's where we're ever going to get. So I think as long as we can promote diversity, we're good. I know we're out of time, so.
No, I love that. It is just the opposite of move fast and break things. Just the opposite of that, what you are aiming at. And that's the magic. Mm-hmm. And Nina, I know that your country, and your efforts are like tough, Nina. It's not easy to be in your position in the Brazil of 2021. And so I guess that you're making like a huge effort in staying positive in all of this. But I want to ask you, Nina, from your 25-year-old vision, from the place you are and from your culture and communities, how do you see this? What is the magic solution, or what is the effort that we think that we should allocate our energy in to achieve digital emancipation?
Okay, great question, Renata. Really isn't easy living here, but I love Brazil, and I believe in the new generation, in the use digital technology, use social media, use social network, because in the last 2 weeks we promote a big act for Black lives here in Brazil. So I caused a tragedy in one of the favelas at Rio. And after this, we organized on Twitter a mobilization for everyone, with hashtags, with people in the street, with a mask, okay, with a mask and with alcohol. The people organized this, a big act for Black lives. And I think here in Brazil, there is a good chance to change the digital tools, because there is a many researchers and organizations worry with the cloud, for example. We think this is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to create our cloud, not to use the Amazon or Google or anyone clouds from USA, because our data, our lives data, is in these hands. And after the data leaks in February here in Brazil, we start to pay attention to this. So I think the new generation, we can help us with this, help us with change the way, because I know today is difficult, but I believe I'm very optimistic with my generation, with the possibilities, and much of this with the tools in your hands. So I want to say I'm a big fan from Data for Black. Taiwan trying to talk more early, and a big fan from a curse, abolish the big data. So I believe the big data and security and clouds needs to our hands, Latin America and Africa continent. I'm a person don't use it. For example, I don't use the Google Drive. Okay, and me try here in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil disseminate this idea. Change your tools. Change your tools using your daily. Change your mind. Okay, I understand this is a process, but I believe this is of the way for change the actually situation in Latin America and Brazil.
I love it. I love it because there were two continents that, like that had like, as Juan illustrated, like very, very, very close collaboration in the non-aligned movement. So it is only natural for us to join efforts with the sisters in Africa and make this better and abolish big data and big tech with it, as you said. And last but not least, Andrea, we missed you. We haven't heard from you since the beginning of this conference. What is the magic formula? And it is cultural hacking and all this combination of ideas that you gave us. Which are your last thoughts on digital emancipation that you would like to share with us?
Well, there's no magic formulas, but it is a process. And I believe in cultural change because I myself are a result of this kind of processes of digital emancipation. I grown up with using the first websites and stuff and having access through internet, through different literature and groups and movements can help me a lot to connect in solidarity, but also in emancipation with a lot of people in other parts of the world and learning from their experiences. So that's really powerful. And that's why I believe that it's important and urgent to think in that kind of networks and bring that spirit to the internet that we habitate. So I think also that the narratives are sense-making systems. And also I share a lot of what Juan was sharing with us earlier, because the humans constantly need to make sense of our own reality to be able to make decisions or opinions and act. So the narratives are how we do it. And every day, the narratives drive our thoughts and our actions. So the dominant narrative system dominate the narrative landscape. They shape the dominant culture, the worldviews. They reflect the narratives of the dominant group. And also these dominant narratives silence other narratives. They invisibilize narratives. And with these narratives, they invisibilize ways of existing, ways of living. But this is not inevitable. We all are containers of this narrative. So that's why it's really important to listen and understand the narratives that we consume. And also, how can we avoid reproducing and consuming the narratives that perpetuate systems of oppression? Today's challenge for the world are far greater than traditional campaigning methods, and especially for us that are working hard to bring this into the conversations and bring attention and people into action. We need a change. We need to change is bigger than any other issue. So we know that the change is possible, but it's never permanent. So we need to change the cultural narratives that creates and justify the ecological breakdown, the inequality, the poverty, and racism. So we will continue fighting for it. And it's something that you need to do on your daily basis.
Yes, from Palestine to Rio de Janeiro, from Oaxaca to Buenos Aires, and from the internet to the platforms that are now and again, I forgot to turn on my video. Sorry, apologies. I was saying that from Palestine to Oaxaca, to Guatemala, to Rio de Janeiro and the favelas, to all our peoples and our differences and our efforts and our dreams. I think, and after this panel, I firmly believe that another tech future is possible and is being built at the community level. And we will see the results flourishing very, very, very soon with this committed generation. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this panel. And over to Daniel Murray, the director of the center, who has something to share with us.
Thank you very much, Renata. I'm Daniel Murray. I'm the executive director at the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, one of the co-hosts of the conference. I just want to thank all of our panelists today for inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, discussions, the panel organizers for bringing together some really amazing folks today, and all of the attendees from around the world for joining us today. We'll be back again tomorrow, 10 o'clock Pacific. We have two great panels tomorrow. At 10 o'clock, we'll have a panel on racial justice and digital agri-foods food systems, thinking about workers and agriculture and technology. And then we'll have a panel on police technology and abolition movements. Both of those will be great. And then at 4 o'clock Pacific, the keynote, which is the 16th annual Anne and Lauren Kiva Distinguished Lecture featuring Ruha Benjamin, professor at Princeton, and really one of the leading public intellectuals working at this intersection of technology and racial justice. We heard a bit about her work and quoted her today. So we hope you can join us tomorrow. Thanks everyone for being part of the conversation today.